Welcome to The Criminologist, the podcast dedicated to educating and entertaining our listeners. We bring you subject matter experts from around the world and share the latest and greatest evidence-based practices and interventions to help individuals desist from a life of crime and delinquency. We do so by painting an accurate picture of that journey from the perspective of the justice-involved individual. Too often, our perceptions of those individuals are tainted by media-driven caricatures created to sell newspapers or movie tickets. This adds little to a healthy dialogue as to how to best address criminality and the reintegration process. This podcast avoids stereotypes and biases in favor of the lived experiences of those we can best learn from. Now, please, welcome the host of The Criminologist, Joseph Arvidsson.
Hello, and welcome to episode 89 of the Criminologist podcast. Happy to have you all with us today. We are going to keep it domestic today and feature another fantastic subject matter expert and current practitioner. We're going to delve into the topic of specialty courts today. If you are unfamiliar with this term or this phenomenon, specialty courts are problem-solving court strategies which are designed to address the root causes of criminal activity by coordinating efforts of the judiciary, the prosecutor, the defense attorney, probation, of course, also law enforcement, treatment providers, mental health services, and social service agencies. Really kind of a full court press approach to the reintegration process. Now, some examples of specialty courts range from adult drug court, DWI court, family dependency treatment court, juvenile drug court, mental health court, even veterans courts. Our very special guest today, David Kraus, is going to tell you all about specialty courts and so much more. David is an experienced drug court case manager and intensive juvenile probation officer with a history of working in the criminal justice system and the courts, which he's going to share with us all today. David secured his bachelor's degree from the University of Holy Cross, focusing on social counseling, went on to gain a master's degree from Sam Houston State University with a focus on criminal justice. Please enjoy my conversation with David Kraus, joining us all the way from the great state of Louisiana. And I will see you all on the other side. Well, why don't we start off, David? Tell our audience just a little bit about yourself, your background, both educationally and professionally, and we'll take it from there.
Well, I'm an experienced drug court case manager and an intensive juvenile probation officer with a demonstrated history of working in the criminal justice system and the courts for over 20 years now. I'm skilled in crisis intervention, prevention, investigations, social and restorative justice, and doing legal research. I'm a strong community and social services professional with a bachelor's degree in social counseling from the University of Holy Cross in New Orleans, Louisiana, and a master's degree focused in criminal justice from Sam Houston State University in Huntsville, Texas.
One of the things I love about the field of corrections, and I've experienced this as myself, is it affords individuals the opportunity to really move around in the field. I would note that you transitioned from an intensive juvenile probation officer to your current role as a drug court case manager. What prompted that transition on your part?
Well, first and foremost, there was a point in my career when I decided that just locking up the nonviolent offenders for minor offenses, just small technicalities, just really was not working. Failed drug test was not a reason to send someone to jail. When you send a nonviolent offender to prison, they just come out more violent. You don't want to put a nonviolent offender in with a violent offender because then the nonviolent offender comes out violent. This is where our risk and needs triage is necessary to determine when those are arrested, will they benefit from a restorative justice model rather than a lengthy incarceration? And usually it does.
Yeah, I just love that you're noting the risk principle. Again, these universal principles apply regardless of the population we're working with. We have listeners from around the world working in different types of jurisdictions, different models. So for those listeners who are unfamiliar with so-called specialty courts, give us an overview of specialty courts and or the drug courts, which is really what you're working with now as a case manager.
Well, the specialty courts are a form of restorative justice. Several types of specialty courts. There's drug courts, sobriety court, which was formerly known as DWI court. There's a veterans court, a behavioral health court, reentry court, many different types. These courts are for nonviolent offenders with co-occurring disorders of substance abuse and or mental illness, and it's designed to address the need for treatment, support, monitoring, and a highly structured system. Well, in any of these specialty court programs, our clients are required to attend counseling sessions, which addresses their need for treatment, support, and monitoring in a highly structured system. While in any of these programs, the clients are required to attend counseling at least 1 hour. They submit to random drug screens twice a week. They attend outside AA or NA meetings, which now we call support groups. We try to get away from the terms AA or NA, but they attend those at least 3 times a week. Drug court or any of the other specialty courts utilize a team approach. And this team approach is evidence-based. Clients work closely with their assigned case manager, probation officer, treatment counselor, and they also have a sponsor that they work through in their support groups. They appear in court regularly depending on their progression through our phases in the drug court program. We have 4 phases in our program, and they advance to these higher phases depending on several factors. If they abstain from substance abuse, they are not rearrested. They attend their treatment counseling sessions scheduled. They attend their 12-step support meetings. They're advanced to higher phases of the program, which have a benefit in the long run because they don't have as much to do for us. They're able to get back into the world of working a little more so they can pay their bills and take care of their families and do things like that, really good things. Each type of these specialty courts has a different timeline of each phase and requirements. Generally speaking, these programs are very much designed the same.
I love that, almost as you described it, a full court press, a real team effort when it comes to the change process, which is really awesome. Hey, share with us some of the great things coming out of Louisiana as a result of this great specialty court framework that you just described.
Well, with the assistance of the sheriff's office and quickly assessing these individuals that are being arrested, along with the district attorney's office and understanding how beneficial specialty courts are in deterring recidivism upon completion of a specialty court program. We should see a decrease in the frequent flyers, proof that R&R works. Done properly, it removes the criminogenic risk factors that have led many of these individuals to a life of crime. We can break this cycle of generations of families being incarcerated due to these learned behaviors if we can just give them the tools that they need. Although we'll always face the genetic element of substance abuse or anything else that makes someone genetically predisposed to a life of crime. some of the genetically predisposed things, once they get a taste of a drug, it sort of sets off that predisposition. And that's the thing that we need to work on. We need to try to keep them from getting that taste of the drug and leading them down the wrong road. Our job in the drug court system is to remain proactive in providing the best evidence-based practices provided by organizations such as the National Association of Drug Court, Drug and Specialty Courts, Louisiana Association of Drug and Specialty Courts, and deterring a life of substance abuse and criminality in general.
I just love when you said proof that R&R works. That was music to my ears. But then you also followed up a little bit talking about some of the genetic variables behind substance misuse. I know that I recently interviewed Dr. James Bonta, and sort of the grandfather of risk needs responsivity. And he acknowledged that same thing. Like, yeah, there's brain chemistry, there's genetics, there's a lot of things, which again, as a risk needs responsivity champion, I'm sure you'll agree it's the best approach we have, but we should take into consideration all these other factors, which it sounds like you're doing down there, which is fantastic. Hey, David, you've been in corrections for over 20 years. Generally speaking, what are we doing right? And conversely, where do we have some room to grow, perhaps?
Well, in my opinion, what we're doing right is consistently seeking to adapt to the evidence-based practices offered by the National Association of Drug Court Professionals, Louisiana Association of Drug and Specialty Courts, and other organizations that provide us with these tools. Without these researchers that we have providing us with these tools, we really need these tools for our tool belt, or we can't do our jobs. We need them to keep up with the new trends in specialty courts, especially with these new synthetic drugs that are being sold on the internet, in gas stations, on the streets, etc. There's always room to grow. But with these synthetic drugs, it sometimes feels like an upward battle. When I started working in probation in March of 2000, I primarily dealt with juvenile offenders that were basically just smoking marijuana and crack cocaine. This changed as the years went on, with individuals starting to doctor shop after they had injuries where they were prescribed opiates. When doctors stopped prescribing these opiates to these patients, they started abusing other pills, and they started looking for other substances on the streets. Unfortunately, they were buying heroin. The problem that we have now with heroin is that it's being laced with substances such as fentanyl. We always have to be one step ahead of these risk factors, because if we're not one step ahead, the battle is just so much harder to fight.
Yeah, and you spoke of the need to rely on the research against the backdrop of this changing landscape, and I couldn't agree more. We can't sort of sit back on our laurels, but again, research is our best friend in this ongoing battle. David, you and I have talked offline. I know you're a fan of the show. Thank you very much. And as such, you've heard our discussions both around the risk need responsivity framework, as well as the emerging desistance approaches. My question is this: as someone who is, I feel, representative of sort of the boots on the ground, the foot soldiers out there in probation and parole corrections, how does all that talk land on you? How does that resonate, do you think, this, again, sort of balance between the existing R&R framework with a recognition of these emerging desistance approaches?
We must continuously assess these risk needs when individuals are arrested, and throughout the entire process of them being processed through the system, through the courts, just immediately after being arrested, they have to be assessed ongoing for best results. Hopefully, with this assessment and giving them the tools that they need to desist from a life of crime, hopefully we can break these family cycles of criminality, where we can foster their kids in growing up a productive life, not becoming adult offenders. That's just the main goal. We don't want to see kids growing up following in the footsteps of their parents or anyone else on the streets.
Yeah, for those of us who've experienced, as you alluded to there, that sort of generational recidivism, it's depressing to say the least. And yet again, it really shows we need to break this cycle and lean into as many approaches as we can, not just the R&R, looking at sort of those roadways into criminality, but also taking a look at those desistance approaches, which sort of shine a light on those pathways out of criminality. What is on the horizon for David Kraus? David, if I got you back on the show in 5 years, what do you think? Look in your crystal ball. What do you think we'll be talking about, my friend?
Well, in 5 years, if asked to return to your show for a follow-up, I'll be talking about how reform here in Louisiana's criminal justice system has benefited the system as a whole in an approach that leads to new policies and procedures, which ultimately results in statistics that show that R&R is benefiting yearly and a forecast for an even better responsivity in another 5 years. I strive to not make myself look good as a leader providing these services, but for all citizens that are able to break the cycle of criminality and all others desisting from a life of crime, those are the true leaders in our community.
David Kraus, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. I hopefully have you back before 5 years from now. If you wanted to say anything to someone listening out there who's thinking about getting into probation or parole, or maybe has an opportunity to get involved in specialty courts, what advice would you give to young practitioners setting out on their journey?
Well, we don't do it for the money, I can tell you that. But, it's very rewarding when I have a client that stops by my office 5 years down the road. They walk in and they show me their 5-year sobriety chip or 10-year sobriety chip. I actually heard of someone with a 33.5-year chip. And, those sort of things keep us going in our jobs. Unfortunately, we do have some that don't make it. But, those statistics are very low. When we look at our statistics that we keep 1 year after completing drug court, we only see about a 6.9% recidivism rate. And after 2 years, only at about 13.8% recidivism rate. And, we don't want to see any recidivism, but, we're always going to have something. But these are very good numbers, and those are the things that make me keep going in my job.
Yeah, I'm an old timer. I started my career in the late 80s when it was all about trail them, nail them, and jail them. And to your point, David, early in my career, semi-ashamed to admit it, but I can still recall that sort of, rush of adrenaline after a contested probation violation hearing, and maybe somebody's supervision was revoked, and sort of, the prosecutor was happy and sort of the good guys won type thing. But it now pales in comparison, as you said, to that feeling of bumping into an ex-client on the street, seeing how they've turned their life around, and just that sense of satisfaction coming from steering somebody out of that trajectory of crime and delinquency is just the best feeling in the world. And like you said, we're not in this for the riches. We're in it for those little intangibles. And for me, that's a great intangible. And it's why I love speaking to you, people, someone who I consider a kindred spirit, but also, as you know, I love getting folks on the show with lived experience, because I think that's really what it's all about.
Yeah, I can attest to what you said about, working in probation, and it was all about locking them up. And, when I started working for drug court, I started realizing that, treatment works so much better. I just recently did a webinar, and a judge spoke, and she said that when you put someone in jail for more than 2 to 3 days, you actually see them going in the opposite direction. And when I look back in the past years, she's correct.
Yeah, I know. Again, you could relate to this. We talk about the central 8, those sort of criminogenic needs that we try to address, and now there's the not just emerging research, but it's more and more commonly held that jail and prison, in and of themselves, are criminogenic. Incarceration is criminogenic. So again, it's a balancing act. There comes a point when, for public safety reasons and other factors, somebody must be detained and incarcerated, but it really should be this sort of disposition of last resort, because it gets to that point of, is the cure worse than the disease? Again, we talk about the central 8. It should really be the top 9, David, because again, incarceration is criminogenic as well. In and of itself, it's a risk factor.
Yes, absolutely. When you put them in the general population and, they're out in the yard with gang members and people that were selling drugs on the streets, we know that, some of the jails have more drugs and gang activity than the streets.
Yeah. You and I are pro-social individuals, David, but you and I could spend a year in custody and, again, would come out riskier, I would contend. It's really, and again, not to get too deep into the literature on risk needs responsivity, but as you know, it's generally predicated on social learning theory, which is to say all behavior is learned behavior. And we know what folks learn when they're in prison. You learn through observation. And when you look at that high risk population, they might learn some things in a GED classroom or in a 12-step program, but they're also learning a lot of things from the other inmates in the yard about how to hotwire cars, how to trick out drug tests, how to disassemble burglary systems, how to get away with this, that, or the other thing. So yeah, we really have to consider that as well.
Yes, absolutely.
David, I loved talking to you. I know you're a fan of the show. I appreciate it. Good luck to you and your team down there. And again, we'll have you back sooner than 5 years out. Stay warm. I know we just spoke a little bit before online. There's a huge temperature difference between where I am in Minnesota and where you are in Louisiana, but we're bonded for a love of research and risk need responsivity and beyond. So I appreciate you being on the show, David, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate it. And Happy New Year.
And a Happy New Year to you too, Dave. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Tired of those pesky risk factors? Fed up with those nagging periods of reoffending? Just can't seem to keep on the straight and narrow? Then try CriminoGuard. CriminoGuard is our patented repellent against criminogenic need. CriminoGuard is effective against the risk factors of delinquent past, dysfunctional family relationships, substance misuse, lack of pro-social leisure activities, deficits around education and employment, negative peers, pro-criminal attitude, and a history of antisocial personality pattern. Simply apply CriminoGuard at the onset of delinquent behavior or when actuarial risk assessment warrants application. CriminoGuard works by attacking criminogenic need at the source while buffering against future risk. Inspired by general personality and cognitive social learning theory, CriminoGuard identifies criminogenic need at its source. Then our top secret byproducts mimic prosocial modeling to elicit the onset of prosocial behavior. Once the cost for antisocial behavior outweighs the rewards, users begin seeing reductions in criminal deeds. CriminoGuard is available in regular, mint, or jasmine scent. Find CriminoGuard at all quality vendors, shops, and strip malls. CriminoGuard is not a substitute for proven evidence-based practices. CriminoGuard may cause mild discomfort or skin rash. In case of continued maladaptive behavior, users should subject themselves to proven core correctional practices. CriminoGuard has failed to result in significant effect sizes in recidivism reduction. Buyer beware, not sold in Canada. Big thank you to my special guest, David Kraus, once again for sharing his insights with us. Shout out to his team down there in Louisiana. I know they're all fans of the show. I appreciate you. Hey, I'm excited to talk about a new project that we're getting off the ground here with the Criminologist podcast. We want to hear from you all, the listener, as to what it is like to view corrections, probation, parole through your specific lens. Now, if you are a probation officer, think of this as sort of a day in the life of a PO. We are asking that you share your probation stories with us, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So again, we can sort of present this picture of a day in the life. You can check in with us through a voicemail at 612-552-2566. That's 612-552-2566. Or you could even send us a voice memo. We have a special Gmail set up for this. Send it to probationcheckin@gmail.com. That's probationcheckin@gmail.com. Now, if you are a justice-involved individual, a credible messenger, you've desisted from crime, we want to hear from you and your probation stories as well. What was supervision like? Something that may not be captured in the dry data of recidivism rates, etc. Again, sort of a day in the life on supervision. We will be collecting anonymous phone calls from both probation clients and probation officers all over the world. We really feel that communication is oftentimes at the root of making advancements. And as you all hear every week in the opening of this program, we like to paint an accurate portrait of the journey from the perspective of the justice-involved individual. And that too often our perceptions are derived from media-driven caricatures and stereotypes. We here at the Criminologist podcast want to remedy that. So again, share your stories with us. Check in by leaving a voicemail at 612-552-2566 or sending a voice memo to probationcheckin@gmail.com. Audio recordings should not include any specific names or locations. I can always edit those out if they're left in error. And these recordings may potentially be used with a future podcast on our A Day in the Life segment of the show. Back next week with a fresh episode. In the meantime, you may contact the show or reach out to us through our website, theparagongroup.llc.com, for training or presentations as to evidence-based practices, implementation, program design, or, of course, the topic of desistance from crime. If you have questions or comments as to this podcast, feel free to contact the show via our email of thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. That's thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. Remember to follow us through our Facebook page and our Instagram page at The Criminologist Podcast. New fun images are being added all the time to those feeds. You don't want to miss out. Hey, we're also on Twitter. You can follow the Criminologist Media Group at Crim Media. That's CRIM Media Group. Crim Media Group. Go ahead and give us a follow on Twitter. You can also connect with me, Joseph Arvidsson, on LinkedIn, and follow both the Criminologist Podcast and the Paragon Group on our LinkedIn pages. Merchandise is now available. If you follow us on Instagram, you'll see Criminologist refrigerator magnets popping up literally all over the planet. In fact, our latest post featured David proudly displaying his Criminologist refrigerator magnet down in his home state of Louisiana. You'll want to check that one out. Hey, lastly, if you've not already done so, subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Criminologist, for additional content as to the themes of this podcast. And if you believe in what we're doing on the show, if you're part of the movement, please spread the word. Tell a friend or a coworker or a colleague about us. Ask them to subscribe to the show. And of course, do so yourself if you've not already done so. And always remember, folks, there's no them, there's only us. To our YouTube channel, The Criminologist, for additional content as to the themes of this podcast. And if you believe...
The Criminologist Podcast is a production of the Paragon Group, LLC. For speaking engagements, interviews, program design, or training opportunities, please visit us at theparagongroup.llc.com. If you enjoyed the show, you can find more content and videos on our YouTube channel, The Criminologist. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Both the Criminologist Podcast and the Criminologist channel are brought to you by the Criminologist Media Group. Be sure to give us a 5-star review, and thanks for listening.
The thoughts, statements, and opinions of the host and cast members do not necessarily reflect the views of their employers and are those of the host and cast themselves. Any discussion regarding client statements, behaviors, actions, or crimes are purely fictional and are used only for the purposes of example. Any examples that could be deemed to be related to an actual individual or individuals are incidental.